The galaxy had always been quiet, peaceful, and distant. Its many civilizations, though varied in culture and technology, had lived in harmony for centuries. It was a time of relative peace. Planets orbited their suns, moons danced around their worlds, and species lived in their cities, going about their lives. Nothing extraordinary had ever happened in this part of the universe, until the signal came. It started with a faint whisper, like the sound of wind brushing against a distant mountain. A strange signal from the farthest edge of known space. At first, it was dismissed as a natural anomaly. The scientists on the peaceful planet of Valoria, one of the most advanced alien civilizations in the galaxy, thought it might be just another random space event. They had seen plenty of strange signals before. They had always been able to explain them away. But this time, the signal was different. It wasn't just a fleeting burst of energy or a fluke. This one was steady, insistent, and growing stronger. The Valorians, curious but cautious, decided to investigate. They sent their best researchers and most advanced space probes to locate the source of the signal. What they found was shocking. The signal was not just a random pattern. It was a distress call, a cry for help. The message was faint but clear. It came from the outer reaches of the galaxy, far beyond the borders of known space, in an area where no major civilization had ever reached. The signal seemed to be repeating the same message over and over, growing louder with each passing day. Help! We need help. The threat is coming. The Valorians were puzzled. No one had ever heard of any civilization in that distant part of space. The galaxy was filled with countless species and cultures, but no one knew of any aliens from this far-flung region. Who were they? What was the threat they spoke of? And why were they calling for help? The Valorians knew they had to act fast. This was not something to ignore. Their advanced technology had allowed them to map much of the galaxy, but this distress call was coming from a region they had never explored, a place so far from civilization that no one had thought to chart it. It was dangerous territory, uncharted and full of mysteries. We need to investigate. We can't ignore this. Whatever is happening out there, it could be bigger than we realize, said Chief Scientist Vera, the head of the research team. She looked at the team, her face grim with the weight of their decision. A plan was formed. They would send a fleet of ships to the location of the distress call. They would find out who was behind the signal and determine whether it was a threat to the galaxy. It wasn't a decision they made lightly. Sending a fleet into unknown space was risky. The dangers of the unexplored regions of the galaxy were well known. It could be a trap, or worse, it could be the first signs of an invasion. The fleet, a small but powerful force of Valorian warships, set out from Valoria's capital world. The crew was anxious, unsure of what they would find. As they traveled deeper into uncharted space, they passed through swirling nebula and asteroid fields, and the vast emptiness of space seemed to press down on them. They were crossing into unknown territory, and each moment felt like a step further into danger. Days passed as they journeyed through the dark stretches of the galaxy. The signal grew louder, clearer, and more desperate with every passing hour. It was as though the unknown aliens were waiting for them, calling out for help, knowing that someone would answer. The crew began to feel a growing sense of unease. The universe had always been full of wonder, but this was different. There was a tension in the air, a feeling that something was wrong. Some of the crew members started whispering about superstitions, wondering if they were walking into a trap. Others just kept their eyes on their tasks, determined to get to the source of the signal. Then, just as they were nearing the point where the signal had been emanating from, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A massive ship appeared out of nowhere, almost as if it had materialized from thin air. Its surface was black, dark, and imposing, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a massive structure, much larger than any ship they had ever encountered. It seemed to block out the stars, casting an eerie shadow over the fleet. It had no markings, no symbols to indicate what species it belonged to. The Valorian fleet slowed, the crew watching in awe and fear as they approached. They had never seen anything like it. This was not like any other alien craft. It was a ship born of something much more dangerous. Then, without warning, the ship sent out another signal, a direct communication. "This is the Deathworlder fleet. We have arrived." The message echoed in the minds of the Valorians. The term Deathworlder was unfamiliar to them. No one had ever heard of such a species or fleet. The implications of the message were unclear, but one thing was certain. This was not the rescue they had hoped for. This was something far more menacing. The Valorians had crossed a line, entering a part of the galaxy that they were not prepared to understand. And now, they were face to face with something far beyond their comprehension. The fleet commanders knew that the danger had just begun. The silence that followed the Deathworlder fleet's message was deafening. The Valorian fleet had come to investigate, to answer a cry for help, but what they found was a chilling reality they had not prepared for. The massive black ship, looming in the distance like a dark omen, seemed to pulse with a strange energy that made the air around it feel heavy, oppressive. No one on the Valorian ship spoke for a long moment. It was as if they were all holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then the Deathworlder fleet spoke again, its voice booming across the communication channels, this time clearer and more direct. "You have come. Prepare yourselves." The words hung in the air like a threat, their meaning unclear but undeniable. The Valorians had only just begun to understand the implications of their actions. They were no longer on a diplomatic mission, nor were they simply responding to a distress call. They were intruders in a place where they had no business being. "Commander Tallis," Chief Scientist Vera said, her voice low but steady, "we should turn back. This is too dangerous. We don't know who these beings are, or what they want. Our best course of action is to retreat and report back to the Council." Commander Tallis, the leader of the Valorian fleet, shook his head. He had already made up his mind. "No, Vera. We need to know more. This could be the most important discovery in the history of the galaxy. We can't turn back now." Vera didn't respond immediately, but she knew he was right. The curiosity that had driven them to this far-off part of space was now pushing them deeper into danger. There was no turning back. The question was, what were they about to find? The fleet continued to inch forward, the dark shape of the Deathworlder ship growing larger in their viewports. It seemed to have a life of its own, its surface moving, shifting in a way that made it seem almost organic. The Valorians had studied countless alien ships, but nothing like this. Nothing that could explain what they were seeing. The ship's structure was alien, unsettling. The very air around it seemed to hum with energy, charged with an ominous force. The closer they got, the more oppressive it felt. Suddenly, the ship's weapons systems powered up, and the entire Valorian fleet felt the weight of their presence. The weapons weren't aimed at the Valorians, not yet, but the feeling was unmistakable. The Deathworlders were watching them, waiting for them to make a move. "All ships, prepare for immediate action," Tallis ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "We don't know what we're dealing with here, but we're not going down without a fight." The Valorian ships powered up, their engines humbling against the overwhelming presence of the Deathworlder fleet. The once peaceful explorers were now warriors, preparing for a confrontation that seemed inevitable. The Deathworlder ship began to move. It was slow at first, its massive frame cutting through space like a dark whale in the vast ocean of stars. But then, without warning, it accelerated, closing the gap between the two fleets at a terrifying speed. The Valorians were taken off guard by the sheer power of the Deathworlder vessel, and they quickly realized that they were not in control of the situation. "Move! Get us out of here!" Tallis shouted, but it was already too late. The Deathworlder ship fired. A massive energy pulse shot out from its guns, striking one of the Valorian ships. The explosion was deafening. In an instant, the Valorian ship was torn apart, its debris scattering in all directions. The crew aboard the ship had no chance to escape. The rest of the Valorian fleet watched in stunned silence as the pieces of their ship drifted into space. The reality of their situation was sinking in. The Deathworlders were not interested in peaceful negotiations. They were here for something else. They were not afraid to fight, and if the Valorians didn't act fast, they would be next. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Prepare to return fire. Talus barked, his voice cracking with urgency. But the Deathworlders weren't done. A second ship from their fleet moved in, its sleek, deadly form cutting through the darkness of space with terrifying precision. It deployed smaller, faster fighters, sleek ships that zipped through space like shadows. They began to swarm the Valorian fleet, launching missiles and energy blasts that lit up the void with blinding light. The Valorians fought back with everything they had, their weapons firing in all directions. The enemy ships were too fast, too powerful. The Valorians were barely holding their ground, the odds stacked impossibly against them. And then, just as the battle seemed to reach its peak, something even more terrifying happened. From behind the Deathworlder fleet came another ship, even larger and more imposing than the one that had fired upon them earlier. It was a ship unlike anything the Valorians had ever seen. Its weapons glowed with a dark energy that seemed to bend the fabric of space itself. The sheer size of it was enough to send chills down the spine of even the most experienced officer aboard the Valorian fleet. "This is no ordinary fleet," Vara whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "These Deathworlders, they're something beyond anything we could ever understand." The Deathworlder fleet was a force of nature. They were not just here to fight. They were here to conquer. The Valorians had underestimated them. And now, they were about to pay the price. The battle was nothing like anything the Valorian fleet had ever faced before. The once dominant warriors of the galaxy, masters of tactics and technology, now found themselves on the receiving end of overwhelming force. The Deathworlder fleet moved with a terrifying coordination, their ships nearly invisible in the darkness of space, slipping between the Valorian defenses like shadows. "Commander Talus, we can't hold out much longer." Vera's voice crackled over the comms, her tone filled with dread. "Their weapons, they're stronger than anything we've encountered. We're losing ships faster than we can react." Talus didn't reply immediately. His mind raced, trying to process the scale of the disaster unfolding before him. The Valorians had always prided themselves on their ability to adapt and overcome any obstacle, but this was unlike anything they had ever trained for. "Stay focused, everyone." Talus finally barked, rallying his crew. "We're not dead yet. Keep fighting. We'll find a way to push back." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The Valorian fleet was being shredded. One ship after another fell, torn apart by the relentless barrage of Deathworlder fire. The debris from the shattered vessels scattered across the vast emptiness, a silent graveyard marking the path of destruction. The atmosphere aboard the remaining Valorian ships had shifted. There was no longer any bravado, no more defiance. There was only fear. Fear that this was the end. Fear that they had underestimated an enemy so terrifying, so alien, that they might not even be capable of understanding it. As the last of the Valorian ships tried to regroup, a new wave of smaller, faster Deathworlder ships appeared, darting through space like angry hornets. They struck fast, and they struck hard. The Valorians attempted to retaliate, launching energy blasts in every direction, but the Deathworlders were everywhere, too fast, too deadly. "Commander, we need to retreat," Vera insisted, her voice urgent. "We can't win this fight. We need to get out of here while we still can." Talus clenched his fists around the console, his mind unwilling to give up, unwilling to retreat. The Valorians had never run from a battle before. They were supposed to be the galaxy's elite warriors, the ones who were called upon to protect, to lead. Running now would mean admitting defeat, and he couldn't bring himself to do that. But as another massive blast struck a nearby Valorian ship, Talus saw the truth in Vera's eyes. They were losing. And fast. "Get us out of here now," he ordered. His voice cracked, the weight of his failure heavy on his shoulders. But it was too late. The Deathworlders had anticipated their move. Without warning, the Deathworlder fleet deployed a massive wave of energy blasts, and the Valorian ships were caught in the crossfire. Talus could hear the groaning of the ship as the energy pulses hit, shaking the hull, sending violent tremors through the structure. In the chaos, the lights flickered. Alarms screamed in the background. The ship was taking damage, and there was no way to stop it. "We need tow," Vera began, but she was cut off by the sudden sound of a massive explosion. A nearby Galorian vessel erupted into a fireball, its once proud form disintegrating in a spectacular display of light. Pieces of debris flew through space, sending shockwaves rippling across the battlefield. The Valorian fleet was no more. What was left of it was little more than a scattered group of ships, barely holding together, surrounded on all sides by the relentless might of the Deathworlders. For the first time in a long time, Commander Talus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: despair. But just as all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. Out of the shadows of space, a new ship appeared. It wasn't a Valorian vessel. It was dark, sleek, and menacing, its surface shimmering with strange energy patterns that no one could decipher. The ship moved with purpose, cutting through the wreckage of the battle like a knife through butter. Is that another Deathworlder ship?" Vera whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," Talus said, a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. "This one's different. But who could it be?" The mysterious ship's weapons powered up, sending a pulse of energy that instantly obliterated several smaller Deathworlder fighters. The sheer force of the attack sent ripples through space, disorienting the remaining ships. The Valorians watched, stunned, as the unknown ship launched a series of devastating counterattacks, pushing the Deathworlders back. "Commander, who are they?" Vera asked, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. "Are they here to help?" Talus didn't have an answer. He didn't know who these new allies were, but they were saving the Valorians from certain destruction. For the first time in what felt like hours, the tide of the battle began to shift. The Deathworlders had been pushed back. The Valorian fleet, though battered, had been given a chance to regroup. "Focus on surviving," Talus said, his voice steadier now. "We're not out of this yet. Let's see who these new players are." As the mysterious ship continued to fight back the Deathworlder fleet, the Valorians slowly began to piece together their own defenses, fighting side by side with this unknown force. But even as the battle raged on, there was one question that lingered in the minds of all who watched. Who were these new allies, and why had they chosen to intervene now? The Deathworlders, once so confident in their superiority, were now on the defensive. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the Valorians had hope. The battle was still raging in the vast emptiness of space, but the arrival of the mysterious ship had given the Valorians a much-needed lifeline. For a brief moment, the Deathworlder fleet hesitated, their focus split between the unexpected reinforcements and their original targets. It was enough for the Valorians to regroup, their remaining ships pulling back into a defensive formation. "Commander Talus, we're holding position," Vera reported, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. "But we don't know what we're facing. This new ship, it's not one of ours." Talus nodded, his eyes glued to the screens as the unknown vessel tore through the battlefield with unmatched precision. Its weapons were unlike anything the Valorians had ever seen. The energy blasts it fired were devastating, and it moved with an elegance that was almost otherworldly. The Deathworlder ships, once so sure of their victory, were now in full retreat. "Who are they?" Talus whispered to himself, watching in awe as the mysterious ship effortlessly obliterated the remaining Deathworlder fighters. "What are they?" He had never seen anything like this before. The Valorians had always been the galaxy's strongest and most technologically advanced civilization, but now Here was a force so powerful that it seemed to challenge even their understanding of warfare. As the battle unfolded before him, Talus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The unknown ship was clearly no ordinary vessel. It was built for war, but its design was unlike anything the Valorians or the Deathworlders had ever encountered. Its sleek, black exterior shimmered with an energy that seemed to distort the fabric of space itself. "Commander, they're requesting to speak with you," Vara said, her voice now tinged with curiosity. "They're hailing us directly." Talus hesitated. This was uncharted territory. If they were truly allies, they would have made their intentions clear already. If they were enemies, they could be walking into a trap. But with no other options, he knew they had to take the risk. "Put them through," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. The screen flickered, and a figure appeared on the communication panel. The being was humanoid, but clearly not Valorian. Its skin was a shade of deep red, and its eyes glowed with an intensity that was almost unnatural. The figure wore a sleek suit of armor that gleamed in the dim light of the control room. "I am Captain Ellis," the figure said, its voice calm yet commanding. "We have come to offer our assistance." Talus studied the figure carefully. The being's confidence was undeniable, but there was something else in its eyes, something that spoke of experience, of countless battles fought and won. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet certainty of someone who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer and emerged victorious. You are not Valorian," Talus said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "What is your purpose here? Why have you come to our aid?" Ellis paused for a moment, as if considering how best to respond. "We are known as the Aranth, a race born from a death world much like your own. We have seen what you face, and we understand the fight for survival. The Deathworlders are a threat to all who value life, and we will not stand by while they tear the galaxy apart." Talus was taken aback. The Aranth. He had heard whispers of them, but nothing concrete. There were rumors that the Deathworlders had once encountered a race like this. Humans, they were called, who had earned the respect of even the most feared beings in the galaxy. But the Aranth were different. They had a reputation for being even more ruthless, more unforgiving, than the Deathworlders themselves. "We have no quarrel with you, Valorians," Ellis continued, "but we see in you the same drive, the same tenacity that we possess, and we will fight alongside you, if you are willing." Talus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. Why now? Why had they waited so long to intervene? The Deathworlders had been ravaging the galaxy for years, and only now, when all hope seemed lost, had the Aranth chosen to reveal themselves. Of reach. "Why wait?" Talus asked, his voice edged with distrust. "Why didn't you come sooner when we first called for help?" Ellis's gaze seemed to harden. "The galaxy is vast, Commander. We move in the shadows, watching, waiting. We do not intervene lightly. But when the time is right, when the need is greatest, we will not hesitate." The answer sent a chill down Talus's spine. It was as if the Aranth were always watching, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The idea that such a powerful race had been quietly observing the galaxy, unseen and unheard, was both comforting and unnerving. "We are grateful for your assistance," Talus said, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. "But we need more than just help in battle. We need answers. What do you know about the Deathworlders? Why are they attacking?" Ellis's expression remained unreadable. "That, Commander, is a story for another time. For now, we fight." As the transmission ended and the screen went dark, Talus was left with more questions than answers. The Aranth had come to their aid, but their true motives were still shrouded in mystery. Why had they chosen this moment to intervene? And what did they know about the Deathworlders that they weren't willing to share? One thing was certain: the Deathworlders' plans had just been disrupted. But whether this new alliance would prove to be a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The battle continued, But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, the Valorians had hope. The mysterious Aranth had made their move, and the Deathworlders had just lost their advantage. However, the questions lingered, and the answers were still far out the next morning. A sharp alert rang throughout the Valorian flagship. Commander Talus stood at the helm, his eyes narrowing as the unfamiliar ships of the Aranth fleet were now seen in full, silently positioned alongside the remaining Valorian warships. The galaxy's sky had shifted overnight. What had seemed like an impossible fight was now an opportunity for victory, though a bitter sense of uncertainty remained. "We've detected movement, Commander," Vara reported urgently, her hands flying across her console. "The Deathworlders. They're regrouping, and they're advancing fast." The unknown fleet's battle tactics were unlike anything the Valorians had ever seen. The Aranth ships maneuvered with precision, but their speed and strength were incomparable to anything the Valorians had expected. These ships weren't just built to survive, they were built for annihilation. But as fear tightened its grip on Talus's chest, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was about to begin. "They have a new strategy," Talus muttered, studying the holographic map of the system before him. The Deathworlders' massive ships were now heading towards the heart of the Valorian defenses, preparing to strike with overwhelming force. But something was different this time. They weren't trying to break through. They were waiting. "Commander," Vara said, her voice tense, "the Deathworlders seemed to be preparing a trap." Talus's stomach sank. He had been expecting this. The Deathworlders were experts in ambush tactics, capable of setting up deadly surprises, even in the midst of battle. It was their hallmark, their specialty. But with the Aranth fleet at their side, they had a chance of turning the tide. "Get me Captain Alis," Talus ordered, voice sharp. "Now." Moments later, the comms buzzed to life. Alis's face appeared on the holographic screen, his expression stoic as usual, though his eyes carried an unreadable intensity. "The Deathworlders are preparing something," Talus said, without preamble. "We've detected a large fleet gathering behind the main forces. It looks like they're setting a trap. What's your plan?" Alis studied the readouts before him, his expression never wavering. "We already knew they would make a move like this. That is why we brought you the tools to fight back." He turned his gaze to the tactical display behind him, and for the first time since they had met, Talus saw a flicker of something more than calculated confidence. There was a flicker of urgency, of readiness for action. "They're vulnerable," Alis added, "but they won't fall easily. We need to strike before they realize their trap is too late. Their new fleet formation is meant to lure you into open space, where they can cut off escape routes. We will counterattack, split their forces, and trap them in a pinch. It's a dangerous move, but it's the only way to ensure victory." Talus felt the weight of Alis's words. A risky maneuver with the potential to either break the Deathworlders' siege or bring the fleet to the brink of disaster. The uncertainty gnawed at him. "We'll follow your lead," Talus said, despite the unease building in his gut. "Give us the signal when it's time." Alis nodded, and the screen went dark. The tension in the air was palpable. The Aranth's battle plan was bold, but it carried high risks. There would be no turning back now. Minutes later, the battle began. The first wave of Deathworlder ships launched from their formation, massive vessels pushing forward with firepower meant to crush everything in their path. Talus watched as his fleet engaged them, weapons blazing, the Valorian ships moving in formation alongside the Aranth. The real attack, however, came from the shadows. Just as the Deathworlders thought they were gaining the upper hand, a wave of Aranth ships surged forward, appearing from their hidden positions. Their weapons were brutal, striking with a precision that seemed almost impossible. Their fleets hit the Deathworlders from multiple angles, and the atmosphere on the bridge of the flagship shifted instantly, from doubt to hope. "They're taking the bait," Talus said, watching the Deathworlders' confusion unfold. "The trap is working. They're caught." But the Deathworlders were not as easily shaken as expected. In a coordinated move, The Deathworlders opened fire, and their weapons flared with deadly intensity. The first few Aranth ships were hit, their shields faltering under the barrage. Yet the Aranth did not retreat. They pressed on, absorbing hits but never stopping their assault. Talus's heart pounded as he watched the Deathworlder ships falter and break apart under the relentless strike. For the first time in the battle, it felt like the Deathworlders were losing their grip. "Commander," Vara shouted from the communications panel, "the Deathworlders are falling back. They're retreating." Talus couldn't believe his eyes. After so many defeats, so much desperation, the battle was finally tipping in their favor. But even as his fleet moved forward to press the advantage, he knew it was not over. The Deathworlders had a tendency to regroup and strike back with even more violence than before. But for now, they had won this fight. The unknown power of the Aranth, combined with the fierce resilience of the Valorians, had delivered a blow the Deathworlders hadn't expected. Their retreat, however, was not a sign of complete victory. It was a temporary pause, and Talus knew that what came next could be even more dangerous. "We've won this battle," Talus muttered to himself, "but the war is far from over." As the victorious fleet celebrated their temporary victory, Commander Talus couldn't shake the feeling that something larger, something even more dangerous, was on the horizon. The Deathworlders had retreated for now, but they would come back, and the galaxy would need to be ready. The echoes of the battle's aftermath rang through the Valorian flagship, but Commander Talus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their temporary triumph over the Deathworlders had only bought them a moment of peace. The haunting silence on the bridge reflected the uncertainty that clouded his thoughts. "We've driven them back, Commander," Vara said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "But we can't afford to relax. We need to move fast. The Deathworlders won't stay down for long." Talus nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know," he muttered. "We've bought ourselves some time, but only time." As the Valorian fleet regrouped, Talus couldn't ignore the odd sensation that had been creeping up on him since the Aranth had joined the fight. The Deathworlders were relentless warriors, their skill and cunning unmatched, but the sudden emergence of the Aranth fleet, their overwhelming power, had shifted the tide in an unexpected way. The question weighed heavily on Talus's mind. How much longer would this fragile alliance hold? "Commander," Vara's voice cut through his thoughts. "We've received a message from the Aranth. They're requesting a private meeting." Talus's brow furrowed. "A meeting? What do they want now?" "They say it's urgent, Commander. They're requesting to speak with you personally." Talus hesitated for a moment before nodding. There was no way to avoid it. Whatever the Aranth wanted, it couldn't be ignored. The war was far from over, and the galaxy's fate rested on decisions that were yet to be made. As the meeting was arranged, Talus entered the communication chamber, and the holographic display flickered to life. Captain Alis, the leader of the Aranth fleet, appeared before him. His stern face was unreadable, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that Talus hadn't noticed before. Something about his presence was unsettling, but Talus couldn't quite place it. "Commander Talus," Alis began, his voice as calm and measured as always, but with a slight undertone of urgency, "I trust you're aware that our victory today was just the beginning. The Deathworlders will regroup, but they've also learned something crucial about us. They know we can hurt them, and they're not going to make that mistake again." Talus nodded, his mind racing. "I've seen their tactics. We'll need to stay one step ahead." Ellis's expression remained unwavering. "There's more, Commander. We've intercepted intelligence. The Deathworlders have a secret weapon. It's not just their fleets we need to worry about. There's something else, something that could change the course of this war entirely." Talus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What secret weapon?" Alis paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I can't give you all the details yet, but it's big. If we don't stop them now, everything we fought for will be in vain." Talus felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had known the Dithworlders were capable of terrible things, but this was different. He had already seen the power they could bring to bear, but now, knowing they had something else, something that could completely change the war, filled him with dread. "What do you need from me?" Talus asked, his voice steady despite the rising anxiety in his chest. Alis leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "We need to strike first. We need to find this weapon before they do, or the Deathworlders will use it to finish us all." Talus weighed his options. He knew what was at stake. His fleet had suffered losses, but they had also shown strength, resilience, and an undeniable ability to fight. The Valorians were strong, but could they handle whatever the Deathworlders had planned? "How soon can we move?" Talus asked. "We're ready," Alis replied. "But this operation will require complete secrecy. We cannot let the Deathworlders know we're onto them." Talus took a deep breath, his mind focused on the mission ahead. The galaxy hung in the balance. Every move, every decision would count. "We'll move out immediately. Prepare the fleet." As the meeting ended, Talus returned to the command bridge, his mind heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The Deathworlders had retreated for now, but there was no time to rest. The war was far from over. The secret weapon that Alis had hinted at loomed large, a dark shadow hanging over their every move. "Vara," Talus said, his voice firm, "prepare the fleet for a covert mission. We're going to find out what the Deathworlders are hiding, and stop them before it's too late." The fleet was silent. Every ship, every soldier, was on edge. Commander Talus stood at the heart of the Valorian flagship, watching the tactical display, his mind running 1,000 scenarios. The deathly quiet hum of the ship's systems contrasted sharply with the rising anxiety within him. They were close now. He could feel it. "Commander," Vera's voice came through, steady but with a hint of concern. "We've arrived at the coordinates. No sign of enemy activity so far." Talus nodded, his eyes scanning the holographic map. The coordinates Alis had provided led them to a desolate, barren system, the kind of place where no one would ever expect to find something so deadly. But that's what made it the perfect hiding spot. The Deathworlders were never predictable. "Keep the fleet in formation. Maintain full readiness," Talus ordered, his voice sharp and authoritative. As the Valorian ships took their positions around the cold, lifeless planet, Talus felt a deep, foreboding sense of unease. There was something about the emptiness that gnawed at him. If the Deathworlders were hiding something here, they had done a masterful job of covering it up. "Commander, we've located a structure on the planet's surface," Vara reported. "It's well hidden, buried beneath layers of rock and debris, but we're certain it's artificial." Talus' heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was what they had been hunting for. "Prepare the landing craft," he ordered. "We're going in." Within minutes, the fleet's shuttles were deployed, descending toward the surface of the barren planet. Talus, Vara, and a small contingent of soldiers rode along in one of the landing craft. As they made their way through the atmosphere, Talus couldn't help but feel that they were walking straight into a trap. Every instinct screamed that this was a dangerous mission, but there was no turning back now. The shuttle touched down with a soft jolt. The landing zone was deserted, the barren landscape stretching out endlessly in every direction. A thick layer of dust swirled around them, adding to the sense of isolation and dread. "Stay alert," Talus ordered as the hatch opened. The harsh winds whipped against their faces, but they pressed forward, moving toward the entrance of the hidden structure. It was only a short distance, but the journey felt like it would never end. As they approached, a faint sound began to emanate from the structure, a low mechanical hum. It was a sound that set Talus' nerves on edge, like the hum of a weapon preparing to fire. His eyes narrowed as he gestured for his team to fan out, their weapons at the ready. The door to the structure opened with a hiss, revealing a dark interior. The air inside was cool, almost sterile. They stepped in cautiously, weapons drawn, scanning the shadows. The corridors were narrow, the walls lined with strange, unfamiliar technology. "Stay close," Talus whispered. The group moved deeper into the structure, following the hum that grew louder with each step. Finally, they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room was a massive towering machine. It was unlike anything Talus had ever seen. Sleek, angular, and covered in alien symbols, the machine pulsed with energy, its core glowing ominously. "This is it," Vara breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Talus took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the machine. His heart raced as he realized the true scope of what they had uncovered. The Deathworlders had built something powerful here, something that could change the balance of the war. Suddenly, the hum of the machine shifted. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the shadows, and a room was bathed in an eerie red light. Talus spun around, his pulse quickening. From the darkness emerged a figure, a humanoid creature, massive and imposing. It was cloaked in armor, its face hidden behind a menacing helmet, but there was no mistaking the power that radiated from it. "Commander Talus," the figure's voice rumbled, low and gravelly. "I see you found our little surprise." Talus' breath caught in his throat. The creature wasn't just an enemy soldier. It was something much more, something far more dangerous. "You are too late," the creature continued, its voice growing colder. "This machine is the key to our victory, and now you will witness the destruction of your fleets. The Deathworlders will not be stopped. Not by you, not by anyone." Talus stood frozen, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. The machine wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of the Deathworlders' true power. And now, they had unlocked it. "Vara, get back to the shuttle," Talus ordered, his voice sharp with urgency. "We need to warn the fleet. We can't let them activate that thing." But before anyone could move, the creature's hand shot out, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The machine hummed louder than ever before, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Talus felt the blood drain from his face as the machine's power began to surge. "This is the end," the creature said, its voice filled with cold triumph. The battle for the galaxy had just escalated to a terrifying new level, and for the first time, Talus wasn't sure if even the Deathworlders' fleet would be enough to stop this monstrous new weapon.